But then the Dark Lord learned the craft of ring-making and made the Master Ring. The one ring to rule them all.
Oh, Gandalf.
Have you left the ring for Frodo as we agreed?
It's mine, I tell you. It's my own. My precious.
Welcome back to Retro Wednesday at the Tidarium Hangar. This is Mike, and today I want to talk to you about the 1979 Knickerbocker Lord of the Rings toy line. The entire toy line, everything here. Now, I have a complete set for the most part. I'm missing a couple of pieces here and there, but nothing really too big of a deal. I'm going to get into talking about this. This is a very challenging toy line to collect. Very expensive. Put it in perspective, almost $3,000 worth of stuff here on the table. And I say that, I didn't pay quite that, but almost that. Ridiculously expensive. Took a long time to even gather these to have the examples that I have to show. But let's get into talking about this. We'll talk about each character, do some size comparisons, and talk about the cartoon it's based on coming up. This toy line is based on the 1978 animated movie, The Lord of the Rings. And with that, it's based on J.R.R. Tolkien's Two Towers and The Fellowship of the Ring. And it is very, very much similar to the live-action movies that came decades later. But, of course, those were more or less based on this. They're based on the same source material. And I was kind of impressed with how I had never seen this before, but it felt so familiar because I've seen the live-action movies in the early thousands. And they used some processes called rotoscoping. Rotoscoping is to where they basically film live actors and then they trace that to make it look like it's animated. I'm not exactly sure why they needed to go that route with it, but it was still very interesting looking. And it was a fun watch. It's still a fun watch today if you haven't seen it yet. And of course, if you've seen it back in the 70s, but you haven't watched it since then, it'd probably be fun to check it out again. But still, at the time, it's something that was so different, and it kind of spawned a cult following decades later. I kind of want to show that these don't really fall into the typical size formula. They're not 3.75 inch. They're different sizes and scales. You see Frodo is real small because he's supposed to, and Aragorn is a lot taller because he's supposed to be. And it does fit the scale of the cartoon very well. But as for fitting in with your other figures, these are going to be either larger or smaller than other figures in other toy lines, as you can see with Dungeons & Dragons. But I think it does fit in very well with sort of the Dungeons & Dragons. And there's other Dungeons & Dragons figures that are much bigger, like Young Male Titan and the Ogre King, that match that scale relatively well. But just for scale and getting an idea how it mixes and matches with other 80s toy lines, so you can see. We're going to start with Frodo Baggins, and he is a pretty good representation of the character overall here. And number one, first off, he feels like he's made a very high quality product. And when you look down here at the feet, the paint, when I first got him, I thought his feet were dirty, and I was just cleaning up all my figures like I normally do. And I was like, well, before I start scrubbing that, let me look up others and see if this is really supposed to be on there. And yes, it's supposed to be on there, and it's like fuzzy feet. So I'm glad I took my time, especially when they're so expensive. You want to make sure that you take your time when cleaning these up and trying to make them look good. But yeah, I think overall he is a good-looking figure, a great representation. And so with that, the sculpt on the face is good, and just everything about him just looks just like the cartoon. He does have what the scabbard, the sheath to hold his tiny little sword there. And getting into his tiny little sword, I'm going to show it. I'm just going to use Sam's here. The thing is, these are very expensive and challenging to come by, and it takes a long time to track one down, but it will fit in one of his hands. The other hand is like a solid fist. So you just kind of slide it in there and he can hold his... But I am terrified of losing this. I'm not going to lie. I am extremely terrified of losing this. So I try to kind of keep them in their scabbards, to say, or in their holsters. But tiny little figure with a tiny little sword or dagger. And we're going to get into Sam, because Sam is really, really very similar to this, but let's get into checking out Sam, and I got to get him to stand right. I don't have a perfectly level table for some reason. Samwise is Frodo's companion, his traveling buddy companion, and the thing about him is he's got two open hands versus one being a closed fist hand. And I believe in which I don't even know. I never try to swap these, but I think they're the exact same sheath scabbard piece on both Sam and on Frodo. And he looks like he's got like a hoodie on. Funny little fact, I don't own a hoodie. It's a weird thing. Everybody else seems to have hoodies and talk about them and stuff. Like, I don't like that type of clothing at all, so I don't have it. But he happens to have a hoodie from Middle Earth there. But there he is. He's got the same kind of paint on the feet, which is to show hairy feet, and that's just the thing about them. And not much more to him, but looks a lot like the cartoon, the animation, and I think they did a great job with him, other than the fact that this tiny little sword is easily lost, and so I'm going to put it back before it gets lost. Feel much safer with him not holding it and it just sitting in there, but cool looking. Now I will say these are 5 points of articulation. Heads turn a little bit. It's very tight. Mine are very tight. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I take it as a good thing that they're tight. These probably did not get played with a whole lot. I mean, in all reality, I haven't picked up any that look like they've been played with much at all. In fact, probably just the Ring Wraith was played with the most, because it is probably the coolest looking figure out of all these. The meanest, baddest one. Well, we'll get into that here in a bit. But there's Samwise. The next one is Golem or Schmeagol. Schmeagol. But they do refer to him in the cartoon more as Golem. And actually, he talks more normal in the cartoon than he does with that crazy voice of his, but he does kind of get into his precious and talk about his precious. But he looks a lot like both the cartoon and the live action movie, and the live action movie has him all kind of shriveled up and shrunken in like this, but pretty cool looking figure overall. And it's one of those things that, like, maybe 10 years ago I would have come across one collecting Star Wars and just not known what it was and just passed on it. But it's a pretty cool figure. These generally run like $100 for this guy here, and sometimes you find some deals on them for much cheaper. I wouldn't mind getting a spare one if I could find a cheap one just for fun, but I think I've spent enough on this toy line, so enough messing around with it. But it doesn't do much. 5 points of articulation with his face. You can see he's got his 2 teeth painted in like usual. He's got his eyes in there, kind of shrunken face, basically a skull with a little bit of tissue around it is all that's left of Schmeagol. But pretty cool looking figure overall. His hands look very big for him. Doesn't come with an accessory at all. This is all you get in the package with the Schmeagol, and I do think it's an interesting looking figure, and it's one that I probably came across several times back in the 90s and early 2000s, and just had no idea what it was, but someone else knew what it was, I'm sure. Schmeagol, or Golem. Next up we got Aragorn, and I got kind of a strange angle on this, but he's a tall figure. Maybe the tallest? No, probably about the tallest, but Gandalf with his hat makes him the tallest. He looks a lot like the cartoon. Again, they did a great job nailing the sculpt. We're talking about 78 when this was released, so probably... these were made in 79, so yeah, sculpted in 78, probably. And it's got the big old belt buckle on there, 5 points of articulation. The articulation is kind of weird on these two because, and I don't want to go too far. I don't want to break him. I'm not gonna lie. I'm trying not to break this guy, but he looks really good overall as a figure. 5 points of articulation. Does come with his sword, and I gotta be real careful. I did knock it out of there. There's a hole in the side of him, and then you just plug this in. And he's fallen over a few times, but I've got his sword comes out of his sheath. Now these are really thin, like ultra thin swords, and he can hold it, of course, like that. And there is Aragorn, and yeah, the swords are, all the weapons accessories are really challenging to find. It's not so much that they're just stupid expensive. It's that they just almost don't exist. And so you look at, and with all the vintage toy lines, the accessories are always the hard part to get with these, and so I mean, knowing that going into it took a lot of patience, but there he is, Aragorn, and as I said, he does match the animation very well, so I think they did a great job on this figure, and pretty much all the figures in this toy line look like the cartoon, which is probably why collectors go after it so well. If they were absolutely horrible figures, I don't think people would be after them so much. Next up we have Gandalf. Okay, Gandalf might be the tallest because of his hat. It's a tall hat, and a tall stick. He holds a tall stick. So for just having a stick and a hat, I mean, those things are hard to get. And I have to admit that he looks pretty good, but he suffers the Emperor syndrome. Actually, it's one step further because it doesn't even move. But his Emperor doesn't even doesn't have two legs that move, and the hat falls off real easy on mine. I don't know. Like, push it on a little harder and it'll stay maybe a little bit better. But yeah, he's just a giant hunk of plastic with 2 points of articulation, and yeah, but he holds on to his staff, which is kind of a cool looking staff overall, and his hat is it's an interesting hat that he has, but overall not a lot of play value, but it's one of those things that you need this character. Now in the cartoon itself, he more or less doesn't really do a whole lot when it comes to action wise, but you can have him just over here casting his spells and stuff and reenacting pretty much the majority of the cartoon as this character. But I was a little bit disappointed when I found out this guy was just a giant hunk of something and then two arms that move. But on the other hand, it doesn't really bother me at all because all he's going to do is stand on my shelf and basically look like this. So he gets the job done for me. And again, like all the other ones, great sculpt. I'm going to take the hat off. You can see a little bit better of the head sculpt. Great sculpt of the head and looks pretty good. That giant beard, and yeah, it's just a really interesting design because I think this is a whole other piece that's either glued on or clipped on or somehow, but he has no articulation, obviously, because of that giant beard of his. But cool figure, although no articulation, a 2-point articulation action figure. Next up we have the Ring Wraith and the Charger horse, which is really cool looking overall. Now they don't come together, and I don't think they ever sold them as a gift pack or anything. I don't think the line lasted that long. It literally was a one and done, wham bam, thank you ma'am toy line. And I think I'll have put the pictures up through here somewhere. But this is probably the highlight of the toy line right here. And let's show this. So the Ring Wraith himself is a evil, mean looking dude. Now mine is pretty loose, so I think it got played with a bit as a kid, and with that, these are tough to come by, especially with the cape. Now it has a removable cape, and then he has a removable belt, and on that belt, and I haven't even tried to pull it off, but I believe this comes off too. So he's got the belt with a loop for the scabbard, the sheath, and then a sword. But let's look at this axe. It's kind of like a double axe kind of thing going on here, and people try to get a ton of money out of just this part. I mean, every accessory, people try to get a ton of money for each one of these accessories for this guy. I say the best way to get him is complete, because you may just spend forever not getting a sword for him or not getting a cape for him or something. But what a tough dude. He's in kind of a pose with his arm like this, but I think maybe at a certain point you can have him holding his shield in there. And whoa, speaking of shield, he fell. Mine is real loose, so I got to be careful about that, especially the way I display him. But I'm happy to just have one, even though he's not probably in the best shape. He's still a good figure overall and cool. This is one that you'd want to have 6 of, but for the price, I just don't see very many people having 6 of them, or at least 4. And here's the shield. Now this comes with the Charger, and I really don't know how he's expected to hold it. I kind of assume it's supposed to just like go onto his arm like this and hold it like this. I guess that's how he's supposed to hold it. But it also, as you saw earlier, it clips to that spot right there. And let's see if we can get him standing so we can look at his Charger. But I guess it doesn't really matter because he's going to be riding his Charger. So let's get him on it. And it's part of the reason that he doesn't stand very well. It's because he rides the charger. And yeah, I probably can make his legs look better on there than that. And then he has spots down here for his feet. I'm not going to try to mess those up though. And yeah, there he is on his charger, which looks pretty good overall. And so you'd want to have multiples, in my opinion. But I won't. I probably won't ever get a second one. It would be nice to have at least a figure on the horse and a figure standing in the display at minimum. But for the prices people ask, unless I find a good deal down the road, I'll just be living in this world with one figure and then the horse separate. But I think it does look pretty cool overall. It is a pretty nice looking horse. Now, all the horses are statues, just like we saw with Dungeons & Dragons. I'm not trying to sing LJN praises like they're way better, but at least they have articulation in the tail. But, I mean, there's kind of the difference between what you got with the Charger and you get with the Nightmare. So, I gotta admit, though, that's a pretty easy horse to collect. Getting this one, the Charger is more of a nightmare to collect than the actual Nightmare. I do want to show his sword. It's super ultra thin, like ultra thin for a sword. I was just surprised how thin these were. Obviously, they wanted to make them seem as realistic as they can to go into the sheath. And it is hard to get in there. It's hard to thread that needle, buddy. But I was able to thread that needle. There we go. There is the Ring Wraith. The men that were turned into Ring Wraith and the Charger. So I forgot to point out that I didn't have the reins for the Ring Wraith Charger, and I don't have the reins for this. But this is what they refer to as Frodo's Horse. That's just a rubber band in his mouth that I'm using. And the extra Frodo I used for display was the first Frodo I got, and I got him dirt cheap. Like $50 or something is dirt cheap for this toy line. And he was bare bones, missing everything. I'm not surprised that I got a good deal on him, but still, it's nice to have one on the Frodo Horse. And I'm sure the horse has another name, and I forgot the other name, but they just kind of refer to him as Frodo's Horse. And with that, he's a challenge to get. I lucked out on getting mine for a decent price. So I'd say half the items I got were a decent price, and then the other half I just way overpaid. And as he's just a statue, doesn't hold up very well. I probably should be a lot more careful with this guy than I am, because he's just a statue. Anyways, Frodo's Horse, he comes with a saddle, a separate saddle that is something that you would need. And I promise, they stood for months and months and months on end in my display without falling over. But on my review table, as they get bumped, they fall. Anyway, separate saddle, reins I don't have. And he has in here kind of this harness bridle kind of thing that is sculpted on. And he's got some paint apps on the eyes. But aside from that, just a statue. An expensive statue. So I really hope you enjoyed this look at the Knickerbocker Lord of the Rings. Very, very rare, challenging toy line to collect. Good thing it's a small toy line. There's only 6 figures and 2 horses, and that's 100% complete toy collection for the Knickerbocker Lord of the Rings. And I gotta say that the figures do look pretty good, and the company itself did a great job on these. I really don't know a whole lot about anything else Knickerbocker's made other than this, but they did a good job on the figures. They look pretty good overall. They display very well. Works really well with your Dungeons & Dragons and all the other ones, your Dragon Riders of the Sticks. But is it worth the money? In my opinion, it is not worth spending nearly $3,000 to get this collection. But let me know what you think about these in the comments below. Do you remember the cartoon? Unlike me, I did not remember the cartoon until I actually had to look it up for this review. But let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and Teddy Hanger out.
It's quite a plain ring, really.
Well then, look. It will corrupt and destroy anyone who wears it until he passes into the world of shadows under the power of Sauron, the Dark Lord of Mordor.
Please you. Where is the ring, Gandalf? Why do the Black Riders search for it in the Shire? Have you hidden it there? Would you rather see the Dark Lord have it? Or Saruman of many colors? Neither of you will have it.
There's someone coming up ahead, Mr. Frodo. I can hear a horse.
Good. I'm tired of looking at my cousins all day.
My name is Aragorn, son of Arathorn.
No!